For a while now, I've been actively looking for ways to hone my skills in Genshin Impact. The numerous videos documenting the struggles I've gone through and the challenges I've completed are proof of that. However, I never really had an opportunity to test my mettle with respect to other exceptional players, to see the heights others had achieved and if I could do the same. Little did I know, I would soon get an opportunity to do so. If you've been watching a lot of off-meta Abyss runs, it's likely that you may have ended up watching Furu. He is one of the most goated players in the game, managing to fully starve floor 12 almost every update using a main DPS Amber team he created, along with other creative teams. Several months ago, in mid-February, Furu announced that he would be hosting a Genshin tournament, and many a notorious player joined in, including Turtle Camera, a player who has cleared the most recent abysses using only the free characters the game gives, Bote, a frame-perfect god, and many others, including Furu himself. There are many players that joined that are better than me that I didn't mention here, but at that point, I might as well list every participant in the tournament. Despite the daunting roster, I also decided to participate. Little did I know how long the tournament would go for and to what extent I would be tested. Before I regale you through the story of my journey through this tournament, I have to explain how the tournament works. The tournament itself was split up into multiple 2-day rounds, each of which had a ban phase and a submission phase. During the ban phase, participants have the chance to vote for characters they do not wish to see used for the rest of the tournament, up to 3 at most, although this limit was raised to 4 later on. After 12 hours, the votes are then tallied, and the 6 characters that receive the most votes are banned for the rest of the tournament. If multiple characters tie for 6th place, they all end up getting banned. Participants then have 36 hours to submit a run that utilizes whatever remaining characters are left to clear Chamber 1 of 5.4's Spiral Abyss, the first 5.4 Spiral Abyss to be specific, with points being awarded based on how fast they cleared, and this then gets increased by a round multiplier to signify the increasing difficulty with a smaller roster to choose from. Players could only move on to the next round if they managed to produce a run with a clear time of 300 seconds or less. Submissions could only contain up to 3 refinements on 5-star weapons split across the 2 teams used. No limits were placed on character constellation or artifact quality. There were some other relevant rules that will crop up, but I'll mention them if and when they are necessary. This tournament promoted both horizontal and vertical investment, which is why I felt comfortable participating to begin with. Because high constellation 5 stars were allowed, I was pretty sure that I wasn't able to outright win the tournament and get the top prize. After all, most of my 5 stars are C0, with the few exceptions being Jean, Chi, and Klee. I did think it was possible to get top 10, but I wanted to do it while representing my main. You see, Traveler was the one character that couldn't be banned. This was listed as an exception during the tournament's inception, and being a Traveler main, I couldn't let this opportunity pass. Not only did I want to get the top 10, I wanted to do it while using every available Traveler element at least once during the course of the tournament, and having Traveler be used in every round. It would be rough, but I thought I could manage. And so, the tournament began. Given that I wanted to use every MC element at least once during the tournament's runtime, the best thing for me to use early on was Hydro MC. Round 1, point multipliers are fairly low, and I could easily make up ground in later rounds by playing well. Additionally, Hydro MC needs really specific supports to deal reasonable damage, 2 of them being Farina and Kazuha, which were likely to get banned early on due to how powerful they are. Out of sheer luck, neither of them were banned during the first ban phase. Round 1 bans included Neuvillette, Malvuika, Arlecchino, Sintlali, and then some odd choices in Amber and Diona. To be fair, there are quite a few Amber mains on Furu's server, and some of the best built Dionas were also in the tournament as well, with Diona being known as the challenge remover in the server. These bans were largely troll bans, but nonetheless, it did give me breathing room to do the comp I wanted to use. This was a team I planned on using the first half for round 1. If you watched my Hydro MC video, you'll probably recognize it, since it's the exact same team I used in that video. Kazuha groups up bloom cores generated via Farina and Baiju. Farina amps the team's damage by nature of her ult, while Baiju scales Farina's amp faster with his healing. All of this is to maximize Hydro MC's overall damage by making use of the ult's bloom core feature. You may have seen this interaction when people were crashing their clients by spawning 100 Shao Lanterns and then using Hydro MC's ult to deal a billion damage. While the Lantern interaction was patched, Hydro MC still does the extra AoE damage by hitting Boom Course, making it so that this team concept still works. And by the way, it still works even as a version 5.6. As for the second half, I was using a fairly standard Rational team. It's a comfort pick team for me, and I didn't want to actively stress myself out on both halves in the first round. So here was my round 1 submission. With these two teams, I managed to clock in a sub 160 second run, which I thought was overall decent, but not great. That is, until I saw the times other participants got.
Holy Jesus. What is that?
Yep, you saw correctly. There were participants that managed to get sub 50 second runs. In comparison, my run was nearly dead last out of the
All right.
pool of participants, coming in 37th place out of 39. A painfully slow start. It was not looking good. While I was still
I hope none of them.
Are you bored? Hmm?
Still reeling in mild shock from seeing a 50-second run, the second round had begun. Round 2 bans were fairly in line with what I expected, with heavy hitters like Kazuha and Farina banned. I decided to use Annual MC as the next traveler variant to tick off my list. In my past experiences with using the rest of the MCs, Annual MC had the hardest time dealing damage, enough to be relevant at least. However, with access to several supports that could amp Animo MC's damage, except for Farina, since she got banned, I figured I might as well cross Animo off the list early, thinking that I wouldn't use it for the rest of the tournament. While I was most certainly wrong about this assumption,
That's the forecast.
I went through with using Animo MC along with a Chevrolet Overload team in the second half, managing to get a slightly higher placement with a sub 140-second time. With 2 elements down, I decided to use GOMC for round 3. GOMC is by far my most played traveler variant, and naturally the one I have the most expertise on. I also needed to reformat my second half team slightly since Raiden was banned this round, and settled on Klee Overload. This is one of the reasons I did a Klee video a few months back, as I needed to get some practice in. Luckily, the bans didn't remove any of the critical units for either of my teams, so I leapt into action. While my GOMC side was fairly clean with a 70-second clear, my second side was quite lacking overall, netting me a sub 160-second clear. Round 4 bans didn't remove any of the characters I had used in the previous round, which meant that I could use round 3 submission for round 4 as well. A rule implemented to allow those with more unique comps a buy if they wanted one. I didn't hesitate to do this, largely due to work I needed to get done and me feeling quite ill at the time. It wasn't a great week for me, I must say. After round 4 submissions were all in, the current scores showed that I was in 26th place overall. Certainly an improvement from the 37th place I had started the tournament with, but not good enough to meet my goal of top 10. In order to get there, I needed a second wind. As the tournament entered its 5th round, many players were struggling to meet the sub 140-second mark, me included based upon my track record. However, I had a couple of ideas for teams that could clear the first half extremely quickly. One of those ideas was Gomming Melt. If I played it well enough, I could clear the first half in less than a minute at the minimum, and it was certainly a good option for me to use. Unfortunately, someone else in the tournament had the same exact idea. Buffy, one of the other participants in the tournament, managed to clear the entire first half in an impressive 35 seconds with their team, resulting in Gomming getting banned in round 5, preventing me from using it. Maybe I shouldn't have used the same submission for round 4. However, this was just one of my options. Use the same resulting in Gomming getting banned in round 5, an impressive 35 seconds with their team, resulting in Gomming getting banned in round 5, preventing me from using it. Maybe I shouldn't have used the same submission for round 4. However, this was just one of my options. Krieg is extremely good in the first half, allowing for quick subjugation of the Eremites that exist there. Funny enough, this was my best option to clear the first half the fastest since the start of the tournament overall. I've been saving Dendro MC for this exact moment, and I polished my Klee gameplay up a bit more before I ended up doing my round 5 practice. was my full submission. I had met my goal of a sub 140 second clear, netting me 11th place for that round, my highest round placement since the start of the tournament. While round 6 bans did weaken the effectiveness of bridge comps due to an untimely end to Barbara's reign, I still had substitutes in wait to take the place of those that had fallen. As a result, I had also managed to produce a sub 140 second clear the next round, this time using Pyro MC to buff Klee in an overbait comp and a slightly altered version of Fridge, which ended up being in the top 5 fastest clears that round. I had hit my second win. Through the points gained in these 2 rounds alone, I had propelled myself into 17th place overall. My goal of top 10 was in sight. However, my jubilance wouldn't last long. Producing a fast clear meant that at least some of the characters I used would be banned. And, well, round 7 bans clearly showed this, as one of the characters I had used for 4 rounds straight, Klee, was banned. We had truly entered copium territory. With Klee banned, my options became very limited. Bridge had also been largely gutted with both Kale and Kokomi being axed. I also still had one traveler element left to use, Electro. Seeing this, I decided on using Ayato Freeze on the first half with a Noelle comp in the second half. But wait, Tars, wasn't there a cryo charge attack damage bonus on the second half you could have taken advantage of? Yes, I could have. And pretty much everyone that got into the top 10 fastest clears that round did just that.
Allow me. Don't touch me. Don't underestimate me. Change is my isolate. My blade is already Poor Faith, I'm just so bad.
However, Noelle's poise damage makes dealing consistent damage to the Eremites extremely awkward due to how easily they can be displaced. Other options for the first half were either not well built, or I didn't have enough time to properly experiment with and test. Remember that I only had 36 hours to come up with a semi-working comp, and in reality, that's more like 2 hours since I still have to work during all of this. The run I ended up submitting was barely faster than 200 seconds. Though, despite the submission being nearly a minute slower than what I had produced last round, it was still among the top 10 fastest clears this current round. Before round 8 bans came out, I had some spare time to attempt some runs, and so I recorded a sub 200 second run before the ban phase for round 8 ended. It was honestly a really interesting run, as I had used an Angry Yo-Yo team variant for the first half. You might start seeing a pattern with my upload schedule and what I used in this tournament. However, spending the time to do this was a mistake of epic proportions, as 11 characters had somehow been banned. Unfortunately, 3 of the characters I had used during my clear were banned. I was in the VC with Fu, the organizer of the tournament, as the bans came out, and he laughed at my expense. I had to come up with something quickly to replace what I had just lost, and I made 2 teams, with one being a main DPS GOMC team, to get a sub 250 second run about 30 minutes after that incident. I potentially could have gone a faster clear, but I had already sunk in way too much time earlier, and I wasn't interested in sinking in more, as I now had to plan ahead for round 9. At this point in the tournament, so many characters have been banned that it was easier to show what could be used rather than what can't be used.
It's a nice roll. Oh. It's just loot. Yo. Oh. But no Daniels come out.
Round 9 bans made this all the more clear. At this point in the tournament, these are all the characters we had left at our disposal. Round 9, I settled on an Animal MC team and Dory team, which barely got me into the next round. Looking at what everyone else used, I must have not been invited to the New Year party, as everyone and their mother abused a Ningguang main DPS on the second half, along with a Kujosara and Kachina to get the highest single target damage team left at this point. Round 10 swiftly came, and with it another wave of bans. At this point, only 16 characters, including Traveler, were playable. A literal box of scraps. Being 12th place at this point, I had to progress to the next round for there to be any chance for me to reach the top 10. After racking my brains as much as I could, these were the teams I ended up utilizing. But you may be wondering, Tars, how do you clear Abyss with 2 stars using these teams? Well, actually, you know what? It'll just be easier to show you.
热情还不到，听我最强音！不会的，努力同心，
固执之火，小心着火。
嘿呦，看我的，一手交拳，单输几气，焚烧的，速速对战！
我来守护你，我之盾。
我号令，嘿呀，大显身手时间，实验之法，焚烧的，
It's good as it is.
速速对战！好，来，
后援登场，小心着火。
努力同心，留下摩拉来，摩登血液绿火引，焚烧的，来，快，来，来，
固执之火，我之盾。
地府坐骑，嘿呀，大显身手时间，单输几气，速速对战！焚烧的，
我来守护你，小心着火。
听我号令，看我的，一手交拳，好，来，
后援登场，我之盾。
努力同心，嘿呀，大显身手时间，实验之法，速速对战，焚烧的，
我来守护你。
地府坐骑，看我的，一手交拳，单输几气，蹦蹦，好，来，
后援登场，
努力同心，留下摩拉来，大显身手上绿火引，来，好，来，速速对战！
固执之火，
地府坐骑，嘿呀，一手交拳，实验之法，
With a nail-biter round 10, I managed to be one of the 7 participants that advanced to round 11. It's a funny coincidence that with what is effectively the last round, the amount of people left is the same as the number of Archons. As for the 7 left, we have Johan, Saffron, Chica, Katast, Turtle Camera, Furu, and myself. Despite making it to round 11, I wasn't actually 7th in the standings overall. No. I was 9th. 2 players, Yacent and Sufina, had played better than me in previous rounds, resulting in them having higher point totals still. While I had met my initial goal of top 10, I had a new one, top 7. All I needed was a sub 500 second clear to get there. While you couldn't move on to the next round if you got a time that was slower than 300 seconds, you could still get points as long as your clear time was faster than 500 seconds. However, even getting that would prove to be difficult, as more than half the characters left were ones that I didn't use and or no max 4-star constellations. The level 33 Layla and level 1 Charlotte kind of speak for themselves. I was also largely broke at this point. I had been leveling characters and weapons throughout the tournament, causing a massive shortage to any and all resources. Before any attempts could be made, some time had to be dedicated to getting some of my characters up to speed. And, well, I could only do so much. This was pretty much all I could muster. A few attempts in, I realized my best option were these two teams, a Melt Animo MC Offshoot and Chi-Chi Physical, against Ruin Guards. With Layla and Charlotte still being relatively underleveled, they wouldn't be able to do much damage on their own and were only really useful for their elemental application, which works in the first half since Animo MC can utilize their cryo towards swirl damage and for Toma to get the occasional melt in. While I really didn't want to, Chi-Chi Physical was the only option I had left to fight against the Ruin enemies, which again is extremely miserable as Ruin enemies have high physical resistance. I did have some tools to make this easier on Chi-Chi, such as a crowned normal attack talent and a crowned Yunjin burst along with Uraku, but it was still gonna be tough. Regardless, this was my fight to the finish, and so I entered the abyss once more.
随风而去吧。
我来守护你。
爆炸新闻，谢谢高了，别害怕。我已经。
小心着火！
消失吧！生生不息。
进军！随我冲！
看枪，怒力同心。要更快一点了。
成功！兵贵心伤。
天我号令。
With round 11 done and dusted, the only character remaining was Traveler. Now you would think that no one would have made it to round 12, but actually, someone did. Furu managed to do it with an extremely impressive submission the previous round. But he didn't want to attempt a solo Traveler run, and rightfully so. It would take an ungodly amount of time to complete a run like that, and require a fairly built Traveler in multiple elements. Guess who has that? Being a Traveler main, it didn't sit right for me that no one would even try to submit a run. And so, on a Friday night, I sealed myself for the final time, with only a lone Traveler to my name.
Purging slash. 消失吧！No. It might try starting the way. My song is with you. Awaken. Victory, the only option. over.
Whoever that was.
Sometimes I don't know what to call it. Typing, hiding inside. Life is natural for me to be here by your side. Maybe I'm not your sentimental fool, but I forgot to keep as long as I don't fade into a memory.
消失吧。
Truth it out, all this to be loose. I've waited for so long. I'm dead to love and living for the truth. We fall like a double sign that was a love that upside down. It was from the cool slowly edging everyone like a hustle car is spitting out. Taking me, it's all sound. I should just say harder, harder, harder. I go on, I'm undefeated. Give me harder, harder, I'm my hustle. I feel it, you're strong, you're my father. Lord, to I feel the darkness. I can rise beyond the casino horizon. Forever, we try. Now there's no way to return. I feel it collide. We buried our second just need. Running this go. So we feel the time to go for eternity. Slowly grazing over top is also too big a given time. What to do to win a bestie? Maybe if we take a boat out of the time for both, I know that I will become. To be wise and beautiful, I feel like one how we want. So I can be perfect, who you want it. I can try, and try. With all the distance, I make a difference. Even the seas feel better, stop me. Or it's love, this love you find a new beginning. It's hard.
Caesar, I'll help.
The pressure's off. Oops, sorry.
Time to shine.
Okay. They're getting stronger. Careful.
Caesar, I'll help. Let me at him. Look out. Ready.
I'll make it painless.
Hmm. Hmm. So my phone can just have search history in there. What the fuck is that? Here it is. I refreshed and now it has search history.
With the upcoming 2.0 update for Zenless Zone Zero, a new standard S-Rank selector is on the way, available for both new and veteran players. While many of us may already own some of these standard S-Rank agents, however, choosing wisely is still very important, as otherwise your account may sometimes feel stuck or may even be unable to complete content. And now whether you're looking to unlock a new team composition or to strengthen a favorite character with a powerful mindscape, with this, today I'll be breaking down the top agents to pick, as well as which mindscapes offer the most impactful upgrades overall. But without further ado, let's get into it. For those who watched my last video about the standard selector from 3 months ago, my original ranking was roughly as follows. Rina is the top choice for most players thanks to the value she gains from her M1 and also because of her buffing. Kaleda and Lycone shared second place because of their strong dazed focused kits. Grace and Soldier 11 were placed at third thanks to their values as an Electro sub DPS support and their role as a fire DPS character. But finally, Nekomata was the last and landed at the bottom of this list due to her lower damage output and the higher setup requirements compared to other agents in the game. That said, many changes have taken place in Zenless Zone Zero since I made that list. These updates have come in the form of new agents and endgame content, all of which have significantly transformed the game. On top of this, with more players now owning a wider variety of standard S-Rank agents, the importance of choosing the right mindscape has also become even greater for those who want to get the most out of their current teams. Now, with Season 2 just around the corner, it's also important to consider how some of the agents in the selector might synergize with the upcoming characters. While Yi Xuan remains a bit of a mystery since both her element and role are entirely new, Jufufu and Pan Yin-Hu have already been revealed as a fire stunner and a physical defense agent respectively. This gives us an early hint and context for which existing standard characters might pair well with them, helping us make smarter choices with the selector. On top of that, balance changes are on the horizon, including confirmed buffs for several agents, with the most notable being Ellen Zhou. With these adjustments, it's very possible for the meta to shift and even make agents like Lycon even more valuable than before, especially if they start to pair better with new or recently improved characters. But at the end of it all, here are a few considerations for who may gain value specifically with everything announced from 2.0. First, I can see Kaleda or Lycon as decent pairings alongside Jufufu to round out a Hugo team composition. But since there were many who skipped Hugo with the announcement of Yi Xuan and 2.0 coming soon, this exact value is less certain. Despite this, with us receiving another buff/utility agent with Panda, this may still make taking a stunner like Kaleda or Lycone a good idea. This is because the buffing plus daze from a Panda plus stun team sound very effective. But as always, we'll need to see how relevant Panda's healing and other buffs like his sheer force buff really is. With the rerun banner announcement in 2.0, there's now a valid argument that Rina may also lose value as a potential pick, and this is primarily due to Astra and Caesar making a return in this version. Realistically, Astra, Caesar, and the freely available Nicole are among the most widely used buffers in the game, and as a result, Rina might not see much use, especially if the upcoming content doesn't favor electric units. However, a counterpoint to this is that securing Astra and Caesar requires pulling for 2 whole limited supports during a brand new version that has Yi Xuan, which many players really might not be willing to do. Because of this, Rina now comes with more clearly defined pros and cons compared to before, and as we'll explore in the Mindscape section, making your choice with the selector this time around won't be nearly as straightforward as it might have been in the past. Next, let's now break down each standard agent's first and second Mindscapes, as these are some of the most common breakpoints you'll reach with the selector. Starting with Rina's first Mindscape, this extends the duration of her pen ratio buff by an extra 5.5 seconds before it returns to her, and this also amplifies her core passive by 130%. Now, as mentioned in my selector guide earlier, this is an extremely powerful upgrade, not just because of the increased pen ratio, which is of course very helpful, but also because it eliminates the need to constantly swap Rina in every 7 to 8 seconds just so you can maintain and refresh her buff. Her second Mindscape, on the other hand, is not nearly as insane. When Rina enters onto the field, she gains a 15% damage boost for 12 seconds. But all things considered, since this can be activated every 18 seconds, the uptime on this buff is fairly solid. However, as you might expect, Rina's personal damage output is not as impactful as you'd think, especially compared to what she brings to the team buff-wise. Because of this, her second Mindscape isn't particularly impressive. Next, let's talk about Grace and her first Mindscape. This is a solid upgrade among these standard characters, significantly increasing her overall utility, and with this, it allows her to generate 0.25 energy for the entire team each time the fourth hit of her basic attack lands on an enemy. Now, although this is only up to a maximum of 2 energy per use, her fourth basic attack is something she uses frequently so that she can utilize her core passive. In simpler terms, Grace helps recharge your team's energy much quicker, greatly improving the flow and pacing of combat. Grace's second Mindscape is a fantastic addition for anomaly focused teams, and whenever she hits an enemy with her grenade, whether it's through her basic attack, special attack, or EX special, this will reduce the target's electro resistance by 8.5% and increases their anomaly buildup rate by 8.5% too. Now to be clear, although these effects only last for 8 seconds, this is amazing for any electric team that has her on it. However, as you might have also imagined, most electric anomaly based teams currently use agents like Yanagi instead of Grace as their main focus, so this is yet another pro with a definitely tied con. Soldier 11's first Mindscape offers a solid quality of life improvement, but its long cooldown limits its overall impact compared to other agents' upgrades. Additionally, whenever she enters the field with less than 40 energy, her energy is instantly recovered to 80, allowing her to unleash more damage right at the start of combat. However, the main downside of this is that it can only trigger once every 50 seconds, which means its usefulness heavily depends on the type of content you're facing and how long the encounters last. With Soldier 11's second Mindscape, the buffs provided by this are definitely more noteworthy as they do directly increase his overall DPS. To be more specific, however, when she triggers fire suppression, her basic attack, dash attack, and dodge counter damage are increased by 3% per stack up to a maximum of 12 stacks. Additionally, while each stack lasts 15 seconds, there is something also worth mentioning about this value here. Now, despite this sounding like a massive increase at max stacks, this does not necessarily provide nearly as much damage as you'd think, since it does take time to stack this effect. But as always, it is still helpful, especially if you're in need of additional DPS for your main damage dealer. Regarding Kaleda's Mindscapes, we have the following. Her first Mindscape boosts her overall days output by 15% whenever she uses her EX special or a special attack following her second or fourth basic attack, but in short, this upgrade really just enhances her stun potential, making her even more effective than before. Aside from its obvious effect, however, it is worth noting that this improvement to days does only come after using a second basic and an EX special, and consequently, this means that performing 2 hits as opposed to the full basic combo will be ideal. What's more than this though is that it's incredibly important to time her basic and EX sequence, otherwise you will miss out on the added value from this Mindscape. Moving on to her second Mindscape, this shares a similar drawback to Soldier 11's first Mindscape, having its long cooldown limit its reliability. That said, this Mindscape provides Kaleda with 60 energy every 45 seconds, assuming she first uses her EX special on an enemy. Now, while this energy boost is definitely noticeable, the 45-second cooldown also means that it typically only applies a few times per fight, making this a Mindscape that really needs a bit more context and details and some prior planning before you can really evaluate its true effectiveness. Let's continue now with Lycon. When Lycon's EX special hits an enemy, it gains a 12% increase to its days effect, with the buff able to trigger once every 8 seconds. If the EX special is fully charged by holding EX before release, the days boost is further increased by an additional 10%, making it even more effective at staggering enemies. With the second Mindscape, Lycon also gains improved energy regeneration, and every time that he stuns an enemy or triggers a squad member's chain attack, he also gains 5 energy too. Now, this can only occur once every second, but this is less of a restriction, and honestly, it's just nice that this allows him to cycle his EX special more consistently and contribute more effectively in combat. Now, to summarize, his first Mindscape is great for a general increase to stunning, but his second is great for generating more energy as a whole. As a side note, changes like this to a support / buff type character is always a bit more difficult to evaluate or calculate, but keep in mind that the energy and the days definitely helps, especially in the Miyabi Lycon Sokaku team that's begun getting more popularity. To wrap up the Mindscape section, we finally have Nekomata, and her first Mindscape is a great buff to her underwhelming damage output. This allows her to ignore 15% of the enemy's physical res when performing a back attack, and on top of this, if she hits a stunned enemy, all of her attacks are treated as back attacks, letting her consistently benefit from this damage boost during these stun windows. Finally, for her second Mindscape, whenever Nekomata is on the field or in combat and there's only one enemy left, Nekomata's personal energy regeneration is increased by 25%. Now, truth be told, the Nekomata's Mindscapes are pretty cool. However, it's now time we talk about the recommendations, as we will be taking into consideration both the character and their Mindscapes as a whole. With this, let's now take a closer look at which standard agents or Mindscapes I'd recommend more realistically. The first agent at the top of this list should still be a given, and that is of course once again going to be Rina. Rina is fantastic since she's an excellent pick for anyone who doesn't already have her, and she's especially useful for players with a broad lineup of characters, as she provides buffs, activates additional abilities, and can also provide electric anomaly to an extent as well. Overall, through her kit, she provides some of the highest value among the standard characters, and that's not even addressing the power she has with electric focused teams as well. Taking the second spot is Lycon, a Daze agent with great utility and a pretty straightforward kit, And Lycon is a fantastic pick for players who have an ice DPS like Hugo, Ellen, or Miyabi, as his core skill provides powerful ice debuffs that greatly enhance the team's damage. Now, of course, however, you do need to keep in mind that this is in addition to the stun damage multiplier and the great days that's already present in his kit. But next we have to talk about Kaleda. Kaleda has earned her spot at number 3 thanks to her reliability and impact as a stun agent, and it's true, she's one of the fastest stunners while also being very consistent when it comes to building up days. And now while this does make her a valuable asset alongside attack/stun focused agents, Kaleda also brings team-wide utility with her chain attack debuff. As a whole, Kaleda does have specific scenarios where she shines, but because of her chain attack debuff being pretty niche and less valuable than other supports, it leaves her in 3rd place. For 4th, we have Grace, and of course she is definitely a strong electro DPS who specifically excels at applying mediocre damage, but also applying anomaly at a fast pace. With this, however, her main focus is just applying shock so that she can later activate disorder, but in truth, the value of a pick like Grace is very questionable, as she really only feels playable if you have characters like Miyabi or Vivian to enhance her performance. Soldier 11 takes the 5th spot as a dependable fire DPS on the banner, and while she can dish out solid burst damage in certain situations, her overall performance has become noticeably less impressive, especially following Evelyn's release. That said, Soldier 11 is still capable of clearing or performing when necessary, and she can definitely still deliver respectable results if you know how to optimize her effectively. However, since the average player may find it difficult to maximize her potential, or they may choose to just play the game casually, she's generally a less recommended pick compared to other available DPS options. Still, this isn't always a straightforward decision, as Soldier 11 remains as one of only 2 dedicated fire DPS currently available in the game. Nekomata is the last on this list, and it's primarily because of her more niche role and comparatively limited utility in a variety of team compositions. While Neko does have a unique skill set focused on burst damage, her effectiveness often depends on who you have with her in order to set her up, which can make her less flexible than other standard agents. Additionally, her playstyle may require more precise timing and positioning, making her a bit less accessible for new players. Speaking broadly, however, she can shine in the right hands and when fighting against certain physical weak bosses, but as always, this isn't to say that she can't clear, it just means that she suffers more. That wraps up my updated picks and recommendations for the standard S-rank selector as we approach Zenless Zone 2.0 update. With new agents on the horizon, balance changes coming, and even more endgame content to clear, making the right choice, whether it's unlocking a new key synergy or enhancing an agent with a key mind state, has never been more important. At the end of the day, your selection should align not just with what your roster lacks, but also the direction you want to take with your account going forward. And as a result, me personally, I would definitely probably take either Lycon or Rena, just given how much value these 2 characters have. But as always, guys, you should feel free to choose whatever you like. Thanks again for watching. I hope you guys learned something. If you did, like and subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know what you thought of the video or what you plan on doing for 2.0. Thanks again for watching, though. I'll see you all next time. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.
Lord. Let our souls rest. A little gift for you. The pressure's on. Where are you looking? Ready or not, here I come.
Шокирующие новости. В Москве на самом высоком уровне обнаружен шпион, работавший на иностранной разведке. По приказу кураторов внедренный агент работал на уничтожение России, снижение ее влияния и дестабилизацию обстановки в регионе. Шпионом оказался... Мы с вами много раз говорили о конспирологических теориях, которые транслирует российская власть, и пропаганду, которые озвучивали Путин, Патрушев, Шойгу, Бастрыкин, Соловьев. И вот сидим мы как-то в редакции и думаем, а не собрать ли нам все это воедино и, не посмотреть, что же это за коварные планы воображаемых врагов России, о которых нам рассказывают все эти люди. Собрали мы, значит, все это дело, посмотрели, и как увидели, мы залезли в самые темные углы интернета. Читали план Даллеса, доктрину Бжезинского, изучили заявления Киссинджера и так называемые секретные доклады ЦРУ. План Олбрайт, Ньюстонские и гарвардские проекты, теория золотого миллиарда и тайные протоколы Бильденбергского клуба. Мы не пропустили ничего. После этого мы систематизировали все зловещие цели воображаемых врагов России. И теперь можем ответственно заявить. Там все правда. Так и есть. Действительно. План был, и кто-то его реализовал. Мы увидели, как агент, внедренный шаг за шагом, делал с нашей страной ровно то, о чем уже 20-30 лет назад предупреждали те, кого мы считали городскими сумасшедшими. Цели, приписываемые врагам России, можно разделить на 3 большие группы. Первая, самая большая. Если эти цели реализуются, то Россия станет экономически слабой, изолированной от мира и потеряет внутреннюю устойчивость. Для этого нужно первым делом сломать институты управления, систему сдержек и противовесов, нарушить обратную связь от общества к власти. Вот, например, что об этом сказано в плане Даллеса. Незаметно, но активно и постоянно способствовать самодурству чиновников, процветанию взяточников и беспринципности. Это явно получилось сделать. Внедренная в только было вставшую на путь демократического развития Россию шпионская группа первым делом атакует свободные СМИ, проводит захват НТВ, а дальше начинается кропотливая работа.
Yes, this video title is not clickbait, and Rina is actually getting more value thanks to a new mechanic introduced in the version 2 of Zenless Zero. Miasma, or at least doing the miasma phase in Miasma Academy. Yes, because in case you didn't watch my yesterday's video, enemies get a 80% increase in defense and also a 25% damage reduction. This means that initial damage is also lowered during the miasma mechanic. Okay, I recommend check out my video guys and go to the channel right now because it has a lot of information, but you don't need to watch to understand this video. To be honest, I was supposed to talk about this. I just completely forgot. So yeah, this is really a follow-up for my previous one. Because the thing is that defense strat and penetration, they're going to interact in different ways with miasma. Okay? Because the way they interact with these defense buff, it changes a little bit. Okay, so it's really important to understand how they work, and to make it easy to understand, I would highly recommend you to check out my damage guide, but you don't need to check it right now because I'm doing my best to explain in a way that you can still understand even if you don't understand how the damage works. But basically, Nicole and defense strat buffs, they are losing some value, and they're placing more value thanks to the miasma mechanic. That's the way they are going to interact with this.
The final act begins
I know you're super excited for the season 2 of Zenless, but hear me out a little bit. You like saving money? Right? That's where LD Shop comes in. LD Shop.gg is a top platform that offers massive discounts on a lot of different things, including Zenless Zero. And the best part, all you need is your server and your top of process is super secure. All you need to do is select your server, then you type where you want to. You pick up what you want to buy and press top. You're going to get confirmation due to your page, make sure all your details are correct, and then you can pay it. Then you're going to the game and just wait a little bit, you're going to get your monochrons in a few seconds. It's that fast. There you go. And you know the first time that you buy one of these mono dollars, check this video. So for this video, we're going to be sharing some tests. Once again, I using the exact same build on MB. So now let's apply Nicole defense strat. And you're going to notice here that the damage goes up 1898. That's how much damage we're getting using Nicole defense strat. So yes, it's working. Yes, it's increasing the damage. It's not 48% anymore. Okay, but how exactly is it working in the formula itself? it's on the defense reduction. Nicole is simply going to reduce this by 40%. So instead of the enemy getting 80%, the enemy is only getting 40% defense. And you can see here the damage, once again, it gets really close. Basically, this is what's going on the miasma mechanic. Okay, so we have here the enemy defense. Okay, let's say that the enemy has this amount of defense right here. Then during the miasma mechanic, what the game is doing is adding some extra defense to the enemy. You see? So instead of having this amount of defense, now the enemy has this much defense. And where Nicole enters the equation? Nicole enters the equation by saying, oh, I'm also going to take a part of this defense right here. Okay, so if before the enemy had, let me pick another color. So if before the enemy had 100%, you know, the default defense, and then it added 80% because of miasma, plus 80% during the miasma, Nicole comes here and say, no, it's only, you're going to be reducing this by 40%. So at the end, you get a 40% defense increase. So if you take a look, for example, on Miyabi, it's going to ignore the enemy defense. Okay, Miyabi Mindscape 1 is working right here as well. If you take a look on Evelyn, for example, Evelyn Mindscape 1, it ignores 12% of the enemy defense. It's also working right here. Hugo Mindscape 2, it ignores 15% of the enemy defense. It's also working right here. Same thing with Trigger Signature and a lot of other units. Jane Assault as well. They're interacting on this way. So you can see here that the moment that we apply this on the formula, it works just as intended. Just for example, let's take a quick look on how the damage would be if there was no miasma at the enemy. Okay, just Nicole defense reduction, because this is one of the reasons that everyone uses Nicole 2 today. It's super strong. You can see here that the damage increase compared to the default MB dodge counters would be around 28%.
This is not magic. I know it looks like magic with all these sigils and glowing doodad mattery, but it's not really magic. At least, it's not really the same kind of magic that you would find in a bog standard fantasy game. Magic, as it appears in New Eridu, is better described as science that we don't quite understand yet. Which I realize is a bit of a technicality since you can write a magic system that has a scientific aspect to it, but if I were to try and generalize a magic system, I would think of it more in terms of like summoning a fireball out of thin air and then hurling it towards an enemy. But if your so-called magic system is trying to operate on scientific principles, then you can't do that. This fireball can't manifest out of nowhere. It has to come from somewhere. There has to be an explanation for it, and it has to be sensible and believable. And most of the time, doing that kind of takes the magic out of the magic system. But approaching this sort of system from a sensible, believable, or scientific or even a pseudoscientific angle is exactly what Zenless Zone Zero does. Just as a quick example, I don't know how many of you actually read the little descriptive text blurbs that every agent's promotional weapon poster has, but if you do, you might have noticed that the team behind this game goes out of their way to explain exactly how every single one of these weapons work, and they do their best to make them believable. Just to go back to my original example, these so-called fireballs in this game are perfectly explained by the mechanics of the weaponry in the game. Evelyn, for example, deals fire damage with wires, which does sound magical, but technically she's using an igniter that's mounted on her glove to superheat these wires that are made out of a special alloy called porcelain, which we're going to talk more about later. And that is how she deals fire damage. The fire doesn't come from nowhere, it's actually a product of a natural expected phenomenon. And you can make this same observation with Soldier 11. She's not magically infusing her sword with flames either. She has a fuel canister on her back and she ignites her blade with the sparks that are produced whenever her sword hits the ground. So you see, we have a fairly realistic explanation for what's going on here, and a science-friendly one at that. And to that end, I want to point out that even hollows and ether can be explained scientifically within the context of the game, despite their seemingly magical properties and behavior that we're going to discuss later on in the video. And that's why I think that all of these realistic, rooted in science explanations for these so-called magical aspects of New Eridu indicate that Yi Xuan's mystic arts aren't magic at all. They're just a science that's poorly understood. So fear not, citizens of the internet I've seen wandering around wondering why there's magic in your sci-fi game. Today, we're going to put your fears to rest and dissect Yi Xuan's mystic arts. We're going to talk about what they are, how they work, and their totally believable and absolutely scientific relationship with both ether and the hollows. And we're going to start this process by taking a closer look at Yi Xuan's real-world inspirations, because yes, that does factor into our calculations here. So Yi Xuan is a Taoist preceptor who makes a study of martial arts and cultivation. If you've ever read a Chinese fantasy novel of the xianxia or wuxia variety, you're probably already pretty familiar with this cultivation concept. But if this is new to you, allow me to grossly oversimplify. Those who follow the Tao practice cultivation in order to find a way to control their personal qi. Now, qi is just the energy that flows within your body along meridian lines. And the idea here is that if you can control the qi in your own body, then you can use it to manipulate both yourself and the natural world around you. But in doing this, it is very important that you do not disrupt the natural balance within yourself or within the world around you. That balance is represented by the yin-yang symbol, which is featured quite prominently in Yi Xuan's kit and her outfit. So basically what we're looking at here is someone who is very adept at manipulating the energy that exists within their own body, and they call that energy qi. Following this logic, the little glowing gold flame on her fingers that you see in this shot should be, or at least be representing, her qi, or internal energy. Now, I admit, if we stopped our investigation there, it would sound a lot like a very basic magic system, especially considering this is technically the magic system of xianxia and wuxia novels. However, we have to keep in mind that the reason why Belle and Wise are being sent to study under Yi Xuan is because her mystic arts are apparently a form of ether particle manipulation, which is an ability that the siblings share. And it's also an ability that was given to them by a scientist who was studying this phenomenon, which of course implies that it's a field of science. And this connection alone suggests that this so-called qi that Yi Xuan is supposed to be manipulating as a Taoist preceptor isn't technically qi or internal energy at all, but instead ether particles, specifically the ether particles that are within her body. Now, I know this is going to confuse some people, but here's the thing. At the end of season 1's epilogue, we learned that normal people should have some amount of ether particles within their own body. Like, it is natural for those ether particles to be there. In fact, it seems as though ether particles are everywhere outside of the hollows. They literally exist within everything, including the air that we breathe. This is a very jarring realization at first, but when you really stop and think about it, it starts to make a lot of sense. Because hollows are made out of ether. So the formation of a hollow actually requires ether particles to gather together at such an intense density that they hit this so-called Zenless limit. If no ether particles existed outside of the hollows, then this couldn't occur. Looking at things this way, we can only assume that ether particles are naturally inert and appear only at lower densities, and that something must happen to these ether particles that changes their behavior, which allows hollows to form. And this kinda checks out if you look at the origins of the concept of ether in the real world. I think Plato was one of the first to conceptualize ether, describing it as a non-terrestrial air-like element that moved in circles. But historically, things got a lot more interesting in the 17th century when the concept of ether was redefined as a hypothetical substance responsible for filling all empty space and carrying electromagnetic waves. Well, technically it can carry all types of waves. Light, sound, it doesn't really matter. Now, I think that Zenless is using this classical definition of ether and applying it directly to their world building. That means that in New Eridu, ether is simply a particle that's capable of carrying waves. And waves are literally everywhere. So ether particles must be capable of carrying a certain amount of wave energy before anything bad happens. This also implies that ether particles themselves aren't really the problem. They are a natural and purposeful phenomenon. But the real problem would be the way that you excite those ether particles. As an example of the whole sound wave thing, take a look at Astra. She's capable of exciting ether particles with her voice, with sound waves. Now again, those aren't technically electromagnetic, but sound waves are still waves and ether responds to waves, so this interaction does make sense. And depending on what type of sound waves she generates with her voice, the ether particles are going to respond differently because they're going to be excited in different ways. Now, I could easily see something like this being interpreted as magic. If you could just sing a song and it would manipulate the space around
Yeah.
to you, that feels pretty magical. So it's easy to see why Astra would say music is magic. This could be how the ancient mages that we've heard of once or twice in passing got their name. They may have been responsible for discovering the interaction between sound waves and ether particles, hence why they're called mages. It's also very possible that the Exaltists had a similar origin story, as they are very closely associated with songs and hymns and that kind of thing. But Yixuan is a little different from Astra. As far as we can tell, she doesn't use any sort of sound waves to manipulate ether particles. So if she's not using sound waves, what is she using? Well, remember, a Taoist preceptor is trying to manipulate the energy that's within their own body. So if you wanted to manipulate a certain type of particle that was in your body and you knew that it responded to electromagnetic waves or just waves in general, perhaps what Yixuan's figured out how to do is manipulate her body's natural magnetic field. We all generally have a fairly weak magnetic field, but what if hers is particularly strong, or she's found a way to amplify it? That would be a way to manipulate ether particles. Now, I'm specifically pointing to magnetism here because her auric ink has properties similar to ferrofluid, which is magnetic. And the aura in auric ink is referring to a field that surrounds the body. Typically, it's supposed to be like a visible energy field, but a magnetic field feels pretty plausible here. So her auric ink might actually be ferrofluid that she manipulates with her magnetic field. Incidentally, ferrofluid is typically made out of any compound containing iron plus a carrier fluid, so you can use it as ink. I find this very interesting because ferrite magnets are iron and ceramic magnets, and in Chinese, porcelain seems to be referring specifically to glazed porcelain, which would be implying a ceramic coating. Now, ceramics play a huge role in electronics, from heat shielding to insulation to protective coatings on glass. Your cell phone screen, for example, is likely a type of glass with a ceramic coating on it that increases the durability of the glass, thus reducing its chance to fracture. And as I touched on earlier, porcelain is used to fabricate a lot of weapons in New Eridu, like Evelyn and Jane's knives, which makes me wonder if porcelain is associated with a type of ferrite, an iron ceramic compound, or maybe it's simply porcelain that's coated in an iron ceramic compound, or it's porcelain that has a lot of iron in it and is then later coated in ceramic compounds. If so, then that would make Yixuan's use of it as a sort of ferrofluid all the more likely, because porcelain is mined in the Waifei Peninsula. It's a local resource. So okay, if ether is a particle meant to carry electromagnetic waves, then how do we explain Yixuan's Fulu talismans? Because those still look pretty magical-y to me. Well, Fulu talismans are specifically designed for purification of evil. If we consider ether in its corrupted or overexcited state to be this evil, then purifying it must mean changing how excited an ether particle actually is. We could describe this level of excitement as a frequency. So hypothetically, if ether vibrating at a high frequency is dangerous and corruptive, then interrupting it with a lower frequency should slow it down and purify the evil, so to speak. And that explains what the Fulu talismans do, but not what they are. Because again, glowing talismans look pretty magical. I didn't really have an answer for this either. But then I was watching the teaser trailer again, and I noticed that as she was drawing one of her Fulu, she said, "Formless air gathers, corruption is purged." And then it kind of clicked. As you might recall, the word ether comes from the Greek word for air, hence why Plato described it as a form of air. So I feel like it's a logical step to assume that this formless air Yixuan is gathering to purge corruption would simply be ether, which would mean her talismans are written in ether particles. And that golden light that it's emitting might just be because it's vibrating at a frequency that allows it to produce light on a visible spectrum. It's carrying the right kind of electromagnetic waves. This could actually be a direct reference to the aura part of auric ink. Okay, so we've got the Fulu talismans explained. Now what about this crazy bird? Well, Jingming bird seems to be an entity similar to the tailless, and the tailless is a type of ethereal. The biggest difference, as far as I can tell, between these two is that the tailless can't, or at least doesn't, manifest outside of the hollow. Maybe it can't actually hold on to its form outside of the hollow, or maybe Miyabi forces it back into the blade so it can't accidentally hurt anyone when it's outside the hollow. I'm not really sure. Either way, Yixuan's Jingming bird appears to be completely obedient as opposed to the tailless, and it's likely able to manifest outside of the hollow thanks to Yixuan's magnetic ether manipulation. That's what I think these golden veins represent. It's the same kind of stuff as her Fulu talismans. So the golden veins are like the magnetic field being carried by ether particles, while the ferrofluid auric ink kind of stuff is this substrate that the bird is actually made out of. See? No magic, only science. But okay, this is an acceptable explanation for ether and why it would be everywhere, including outside the hollows and inside of people's bodies, but what makes hollows so destructive then? Why don't people corrupt into ethereals outside of hollows? And that's a very good question, but you see, hollows are not a natural occurrence. They are a man-made phenomenon. In fact, they came about as a result of a war back in the old civilization. Now, the old civilization was quite technologically advanced, as we can see from these robots like Jingyi. So we can safely assume that they must have discovered the existence of ether particles, because hollows don't exist without ether, meaning ether has to exist sometime before the hollows do. So I think it's very likely that this discovery of ether particle behavior led to some scientists messing around with subatomic forces that they didn't quite understand in order to develop new weaponry or something along those lines. And then they promptly lost control of the situation and bam, you got yourself the first hollow. And once one hollow forms, you're probably setting off a chain reaction, exciting ether particles and causing them to behave unnaturally, which forms more hollows and then more hollows and then more hollows. And before you know it, you've got yourself an apocalypse. Now, the current consensus among players is that the hollows look and behave somewhat like black holes. So it would make sense if the old civilization was studying ether particles in order to make something like an Alcubierre drive. I know that sounds really fancy, but it's basically just an engine that would allow for faster than light travel. If you mess up your calculations with it, it might form a black hole. It might even form a black hole if you don't mess up your calculations. So, you know, pretty dangerous kind of thing to be working on. But the problem with this theory about black holes is that even if we're taking visuals into account, black holes and hollows aren't really that similar. For example, black holes have an event horizon, which hollows lack. And hollows also have this chromatic rainbow shimmer that black holes lack. And I have a theory about why these differences exist. See, the developers for Zenless Zone Zero have gone out of their way to make sure everything in the game is a reference to the function of a CRT television set. And when you start looking at the game through this lens, it recontextualizes everything. Let me show you what I mean. If you are old like me and grew up with CRT TVs, then you may have ignored your parents' warnings and placed a magnet in front of the television screen to create these really trippy rainbow patterns. And if you use a strong enough magnet at the correct distance, you can use this magnet to form a black hole on your TV monitor. One that has a chromatic aura just like hollow. And as we've previously established, a powerful electromagnetic disruption would certainly be something capable of stimulating ether particles enough to reach some sort of unknown threshold like the Zenless limit that would then form a hollow. The same way a powerful magnet can create a hollow void on a TV screen. Now, before you say anything, I am not in any way suggesting that New Eridu is a simulation inside of a TV. I definitely don't think that's the case. But I do think the developers are using CRT TVs to represent different phenomena in particle physics. So for example, hollows may still actually be black holes, but they are being represented as if they are the hollow voids that would appear when you apply a magnet to a television screen. So as a bit of a thought experiment, I want to conceptualize a lot of this stuff that's going on in the game as if it were part of a television set. But you kind of need to know how a CRT TV works in order to understand this, so let's go over that first. A CRT TV is a pretty simple but a super cool machine. Basically, video and sound data is transmitted via an electrical signal that tells the TV which part of the screen should be lit up at which color at what brightness at what time. The sensor then takes this signal and passes it through a cathode ray tube where 3 lights of red, green, and blue project themselves at a tiny segment of the screen, forming 3 tiny tri-colored dots that collectively make up a whole picture, when you have enough of them. Now, that same electrical signal that makes these phosphor dots on the screen also carries sound data that is interpreted via an internal speaker. Each part of a CRT TV is mechanical, and thus it is susceptible to electromagnetic interference, as we saw with the magnet on the screen. Weaker applications of this electromagnetic interference are fixable, but stronger applications can cause irreparable harm to your machine. So if you leave the magnet on the screen long enough, for example, you'll ruin your picture display permanently. We can therefore think of this electromagnetic interference along the CRT TV as a form of ether corruption. Minimal exposure is reversible, intense exposure is not. Now let's look at video cassette tapes as another example. The tape inside of a video cassette is magnetic. It's a thin film of plastic with magnetic iron or ferrite particles that are adhered to the surface. And these have been magnetized so they line up in a very, very specific way. A VHS player works by detecting these subtle changes in the film's magnetic field as it passes by this sensor, and that generates an electrical signal that the television converts into light and sound. Now, because of this, passing a strong magnet over the film would disrupt the magnetic fields of those carefully aligned combined particles and cause the VHS player to generate an electrical signal full of visual and auditory noise, if it can manage to generate a readable signal at all. So essentially, all of this boils down to the TV not being able to interpret the correct signal from whatever medium it's trying to read, whether it's magnetic film or a live broadcast. For this reason, we should consider the process of ether corruption as a sort of signal distortion. This is a very important thing to keep in mind, and we're going to come back to it. But the reason I am talking about video cassettes in particular right now is because Phaethon runs a VHS rental shop, and in the back room we have a videotape that represents not just their adventure, but the stories of every agent that they've worked with, or almost every agent. Now, because those tapes contain the stories of people, I want to think of those videotapes as if they were the people in the game. Again, I am not trying to push the idea that the world is fake and that everyone is just a movie, but for the sake of the thought experiment, I want you to think of them in those terms. A video cassette and the film that's in it is a person in this scenario. Now, if you were to pop this cassette of a person into a television set, it would replicate the audio and visuals of that person, right? But let's say you hit that VHS tape with a strong magnetic force. The film that makes up that person would be corrupted, and that would render its electrical signal distorted or even unreadable by the CRTV set that we call New Eridu. That means they would be projected into the world in a warped form. This is an ethereal, a product of signal distortion. Continuing this metaphor here, I suspect that people who possess high ether resistance are kind of like videocassette tapes with different kinds of film in them that allow them to withstand more or less electromagnetic interference.
Alright, that's going to be it for the stream. Good luck, have fun, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.